Tonight, a quiet storm is rolling across America's heartland, and it's got farmers deeply concerned about what's coming next. In both of the last two presidential elections, farmers overwhelmingly threw their support behind Donald Trump. But many still remember the long, painful stretch during his first term when trade wars dragged on for nearly 18 months, and prices for agricultural goods across the country took a nosedive. Now, something's happening again. Something serious. Across the wheat belt, and it's unfolding with barely a whisper. There are no urgent news alerts, no heated debates in Congress, and no fiery speeches from DC just grain elevators sitting at full capacity, rail cars sitting idle, ships that never show up, and millions of tons of wheat going absolutely nowhere. This isn't a weather disaster, it's not a supply chain glitch, it's a trust crisis, and it's spreading across thousands of farms, silos, and counties without making a single headline. In just 6 months, more than $700 million in American wheat exports have vanished from global trade reports. And that's devastating news for U.S. farmers. Right now, they should be out in the fields planting. Instead, they're watching contracts disappear. These exports weren't postponed. They weren't redirected. They're just gone. Countries that have been importing American wheat for decades, places like the Philippines, South Korea, Mexico, Italy, and France, have simply stopped calling. They're not pushing back. They're not asking for better terms. They're doing something much more final, buying from Canada. Meanwhile, the U.S. watches as grain ships skip ports from Seattle to New Orleans. In cities like Sonora, Naples, and Dijon, flour mills that used to rely on wheat from Kansas or Montana are now milling Canadian grain from Saskatchewan and Alberta. Back home, American silos are packed. Grain storage has jumped more than 40% from last year. Trains are loaded, but going nowhere. In parts of South Dakota and Oklahoma, farmers have started burning their wheat right there in the field. It's not because the crop's bad. Quite the opposite. The wheat's clean. The harvests are solid. The infrastructure's working, but demand? It's evaporated. No buyers, no movement. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're finding this breakdown informative. It really helps support Control Lost. This isn't a case of too much wheat on the global market. The world still needs grain. What's disappearing is trust in America's ability to deliver consistent trade, meet quality standards, and maintain political stability. For international buyers, the equation is no longer just about price. It's about control, knowing when a shipment will arrive, whether the quality checks are real, whether trade policy won't shift overnight. That used to be America's strength. It was a reputation built over more than a century. After World War II, American grain powered Europe's recovery. South Korea and Taiwan depended on steady shipments from California and the Great Plains. Mexico's industrial baking boom was backed by American supply. The Philippines built an entire milling economy on U.S. wheat. These weren't just trade deals. They were long-term partnerships that weathered recessions, trade disputes, and political shakeups. Because American wheat wasn't just another commodity, it was dependable. But in 2025, all that changed quietly, without any major announcement, and without any official explanation. It started in Southeast Asia. In May, the Philippines, one of America's most loyal buyers, canceled a 12,000-ton order. No press conference, no argument. Within a week, they'd signed a 110,000-ton deal with Canada and Australia. On paper, American wheat was still cheaper, up to $10 a ton. But that didn't matter. Sources in the Philippine Milling Association pointed to political chaos, customs delays, insurance issues tied to shifting tariffs, and whispers of export restrictions from Washington. Meanwhile, Canadian wheat showed up with stable prices, clear safety documentation, and no red tape. Even Australia, though offering smaller volumes, came through with strong diplomatic backing in the ASEAN region. Buyers weren't reacting to this year's harvest. They were locking in next year's stability, and that's a shift you don't just undo. Then came Europe, and another crack in the foundation. France, which has been buying American wheat for over a century, quietly cut U.S. imports to a 20-year low. French agricultural co-ops, speaking anonymously, blamed disorganized customs, poor chemical residue oversight, and a shipping process that was becoming harder and harder to navigate. They even noted environmental standards were slipping, and confidence in contracts was faltering. At the same time, Canadian wheat exports to the EU surged more than 40%. France led the charge. Canadian grain didn't just meet EU rules, it beat them. Moisture levels, protein content, sustainability certifications, all included by default. Back in Kansas that same week, 3 planned mill expansions were canceled. Silo operators stopped doing routine maintenance, assuming their grain would never leave the lot. Hundreds of thousands of tons started degrading in storage, not because they were infested or rotten, but because no one wanted them. This wasn't about losing a bidding war. The US didn't get outpriced, it lost the trust war. Then came South Korea's move. Quick and clinical. In 2024, the US supplied over 35% of Korea's wheat. By mid-2025, that dropped to 17%. Canada stepped up to fill more than 60% of the need. The reason? Glyphosate. Independent tests found US wheat samples contained residues between 200 and 400 parts per billion, way above Canada's 30 to 70 range. Korea's Food Safety Agency flagged American wheat as high risk. Big-name food companies like Nongshim, SPC, and Orion immediately cut all ties with US suppliers. Ships arriving in Busan and Incheon were turned away or held in port for weeks. Farmers in Washington and Idaho were blindsided. Wheat inventories ballooned by 36%. Some farmers scrapped plans for next season. No one was accusing the US of illegal activity, but even a whiff of inconsistency was enough to scare buyers off. If you're finding this video useful, don't forget to subscribe to Control Lost and keep up with these major global shifts. Then, Mexico made its move, and this one hit hard. For generations, the US was Mexico's go-to wheat supplier. Shared borders, competitive prices, and established logistics made that relationship seem untouchable. But by the second quarter of 2025, Mexico had cut American wheat imports by nearly 40%. And again, Canada stepped in, boosting its own shipments to Mexico by 37% in half a year. Price wasn't the issue. The US wheat was cheaper. But Mexican buyers were tired of inconsistent port inspections, random changes in plant health protocols, and customs documents that kept shifting. Canada, seeing this coming, built a dedicated inspection and compliance center in Manitoba, tailored to Mexico's specific import rules. It offered pre-approved documentation, synchronized tagging, and guaranteed delivery timelines. No errors, no surprises, just wheat as ordered when promised. Back in Texas and Arizona, flour mills started closing. Rail lines were shut down. Boxcars packed with wheat sat in limbo. Even big discounts couldn't get the grain moving. The market wasn't rejecting the wheat. It was rejecting the hassle. Italy's shift might have been the most symbolic. For decades, American durum wheat supported Italy's pasta industry. When Italian crops underperformed, the US filled the gap. Not anymore. In 2025, that silent partnership just ended. No drama, no speeches, just different buying behavior. US market share fell to 15%. Canada surged to 45%. The reason? Canadian durum showed up with consistent protein and gluten levels. Every batch met specs. Shipments arrived on time, with the right documents and with stable residue levels. American wheat started slipping. Late arrivals, paperwork issues, irregular quality. In the pasta industry, one bad shipment can ruin thousands of pounds of product. So buyers didn't complain, they just disconnected. And this is the pattern. Not one big collapse, but thousands of quiet exits. Buyers from Latin America to East Asia making the same call. Go with the supplier that shows up with what you ordered on time. Canada built more than a logistics chain. They built a system. Every load of wheat gets scanned in real time for moisture, protein, and contamination. AI integrates rail schedules, port availability, and weather updates into one national dashboard. Documentation is unified. Insurance is built in from the field to the dock. A contract can be fulfilled in less than 2 weeks with less than 2% deviation. Buyers aren't just purchasing wheat. They're buying peace of mind. Meanwhile, the US kept reacting instead of planning. Over the last year and a half, it's issued tariff threats, pulled export licenses, delayed certifications, and clogged ports. A reputation built over a century is unraveling, and the world's paying attention. This isn't about isolation or politics. It's about the system. In modern trade, the price tag means nothing without the paperwork to back it up. And paperwork is only as solid as the system behind it. America still grows more wheat than almost anyone. But now, it's exporting less than ever. That's the strange contradiction of 2025. Overflowing silos, but nowhere to send the grain. Where does this go from here? No one knows yet, but the fallout is already here. Farm loan approvals are stalling. Crop insurance is being revalued lower. Rail freight forecasts are down for 2026. And in small towns, rural banks are tightening credit for farmers. What started as a supply chain hiccup is now a full-blown economic crisis. The world isn't protesting, it's just quietly walking away. Trust doesn't collapse with a bang. It slips away, with late shipments, botched paperwork, and political chaos. Canada didn't win because it grew better wheat. It won because it said what it would do, and then did it. And where does that leave America? In Nebraska, a farmer who's been working the land for 3 generations summed it up perfectly. We did everything right, invested in the crop, kept it clean, upgraded the silos, but no one's coming. He wasn't asking for bailouts. He was asking the one question that might define America's future. What happens when the world stops calling your number? Let us know what you think in the comments below.